Hi, and welcome to A Sense of Wellness podcast, inspiring and empowering a healthier you. I'm your host, Susan Greeley, and I'll be diving deeper into the 4 pillars of wellness: sleep, exercise, nutrition, and stress management. In today's episode, I'm talking about how closely nutrition is tied to our brain health, and more importantly, how consuming a healthier diet can help to combat the mental health crisis we are facing. There is much research about how to improve brain health through nutrition to combat mental illnesses, including depression, anxiety, ADHD, and others. In other words, how food impacts our moods and our well-being is my topic today. And I'm honored to have Dr. J Kaplan with me to discuss this critical health topic. My guest, Dr. J Kaplan, is Professor Emeritus in the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary in Canada. During her 40-year scientific career, she has published widely on the biological basis of developmental disorders and mental health, specifically focusing on the contribution of nutrition to brain development and brain function. Dr. Kaplan is co-author of the groundbreaking book, The Better Brain, published in 2021, and her primary goal is to influence the way mental health treatment is delivered. Her efforts to include nutrition knowledge in the care of people with mental health challenges has earned her a variety of awards, including in 2021, she was chosen as one of the top 7 over 70 in Calgary, partly for her book, The Better Brain. She received the Dr. Rogers Prize in September 2019, and in 2017, she was selected as one of 150 Canadian difference makers in mental health, in honor of Canada's 150th birthday. With that said, Bonnie, I'm very excited to have you with me today, and I just want to thank you very much for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure, Susan, because when I listen to your 4 pillars, my work and what I'm going to be talking about relates to 3 out of the 4: sleep, nutrition, and stress management. So that's a pretty good start.
It's a fabulous start, and I love that how they aren't in silos. They really are mostly all tied together. So fabulous. So that alone, I'm excited. So we'll dive right in. I know you've dedicated your life to studying the role of nutrition on mental health. And I'd love for you to tell us just a bit about the path you chose and why.
Sure. Well, now that I'm retired from the university, I can't say I'm dedicating my life to studying mental health and nutrition because I'm no longer running studies, but I am devoted to knowledge translation, to educating the public about all of this wealth of information they just don't know anything about. And it kind of boggles my mind how little is known out there, Susan, in part because of my own background. As you know, I was born and raised in Ohio, and I was educated in the States. And I always, even though I was majoring in psychology and I got my master's and PhD in psychology, I always was interested in the biological basis of human behavior. That doesn't mean that environment is not important, that parenting is not important. As a parent, we know that, right? Yes. But I just wanted to know what was making brains work, and I did my postdoctoral training in neurosciences. And so I always appreciated the importance of the metabolism in the brain and the role of nutrients in making our cellular structures work. But most people, it's just not part of our educational system yet. And so part of my knowledge translation and part of the reason that I wrote this book along with my former student, Julia Ruckledge, was because we want to improve the education of the general public.
Ah, okay. So that kind of answers my next question, which is just the fact that there are so many books on nutrition. And I wanted to hear more about what prompted you to write The Better Brain. So can you give me more specifics about this book in particular and the research leading up to it?
Sure. So I sometimes say that writing this book was born out of frustration for both Julia and me. And that is because the media does not cover the vast amount of evidence showing that how we eat influences our mental health. But also in relationship to what I was saying a moment ago, people don't know what nutrients do in the brain. So when I look at all these books out there, and some of them are on New York Times bestseller lists, and they're saying the same thing again and again, And it's what we've been telling people for 40 years, to eat good food. I mean, you dietitians must be so frustrated. I often say dietitians are my heroes because you have the hardest job in the world. Do you know the Margaret Mead quotation about getting people to change the way they eat? Have you heard this, Susan?
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, Margaret Mead was she got her PhD in the 1940s or 50s from Columbia University. She was a social anthropologist and very much a pioneer and very outspoken, and studied multiple cultures. And she is quoted as saying, now this is in old-fashioned sexist language, it's easier to change a man's religion than it is to change the way he eats. And I think that's really true. And that's why I say dietitians are my heroes. You've got the hardest job in the world. But I think all of our education, from dietitians to everything else, including this huge number of books that are out now saying to eat whole foods, they all say the same thing. And have you noticed it ain't working? It just is not changing human behavior. And so part of what motivated me to write this book was my passionate desire to get people educated as to what nutrients do in our brains. And so whereas all those other books out there say pretty much the same thing, and I agree with them, by the way, they're not saying anything wrong, sure, but they kind of shake their finger in our faces and say, eat this, eat that. And it's only getting worse in the last 40 or 50 years. People are not doing it. So we have to step back and ask, why not? And I think it's because nobody else has been saying why. We have not been educating people as to why they have to change their diets in terms of brain health.
That's exactly right. And you hit the nail on the head, understanding my passion, which is nutrition education as a dietitian. And thank you for acknowledging that, the hard work we do. And it's an uphill battle still, and maybe increasingly so, to get people to understand how to make those changes. And you hit the nail on the head with you have to teach them why, and give people both, I say this all the time, the tools, the resources, and that understanding. It's not just eat your fruits and vegetables because they're good for you, kind of in that, scolding people, which turns off anybody. And, it's actually quite complicated in how we've gotten to this place. I like to say, though, that we have a lot of quick and easy, tasty calories. Mm-hmm. So those are those ultra processed foods, quite honestly. And tell us, Bonnie, because this is what you look at and have studied. What does ultra processed do to our bodies? What does the ultra processed food mean? And why do we need to steer clear of it, or at least slowly work on shifting away from consuming so many calories daily from ultra processed foods?
So you raise this question in a very interesting context, Susan. And the context assumes that maybe the ultra processed foods are harming our brains, which may be true, although I think the research on that is not yet solid. But what is solid is it is replacing the food that we should be eating. So if you are, and I'm going to give you some statistics here in a minute, if you are eating mostly ultra processed foods during the day, I don't usually call them ultra processed foods. Foods are things that help us build our cells and maintain our cells. The ultra-processed packaged stuff in the grocery store, which is 80% of our supermarkets now, at least, they don't have the nutrients to maintain our cells or even build them properly. So we should call them ultra-processed products, okay?
Yeah,
so the
void of nutrients.
Pardon? Devoid?
I said void of nutrients, unfortunately.
Yes, especially of the micronutrients. Now, we should explain to your listeners that there are always macronutrients in the ultra-processed products, but they aren't particularly good ones. The macro ones are the large categories. Yes, there might be protein. There might be, there certainly are carbs, but they're usually the refined carbs, not the good carbs. And there certainly are fats, but they're the saturated fats, et cetera. They're not the good, that you're not going to find omega-3 fatty acids, for example, in a lot of the ultra-processed products. Mm-hmm. And what they are almost completely devoid of are the micronutrients. Now, there are two things I want to tell you, and if I don't jot these down, I might overlook them. One is micronutrients. That term is not used exactly the same by everybody. They certainly include vitamins and minerals. Some people include omega-3 fatty acids, even though they're not a small molecule. We don't need a large amount of them the way we need, say, something like protein. And some people include the phytonutrients, of which there are literally thousands, most of which haven't even, that means plant-based nutrients, which are, most of them don't have names that we could say. Most of them, we don't know what they do in our brains. But we know that Mother Nature packaged them in plants, healthy plants, with the vitamins and minerals. So that's one reason to try to get our food from real good crops, etc., rather than just in pill form. So those are the micronutrients. But in our book and in most of my lectures, I use the term micronutrients when I get tired of saying minerals and vitamins, vitamins and minerals. Okay, so certainly and there are about 30 of those roughly, right? And most people don't know how that happens. And they don't think about where it comes from. But we can talk about that if you want. Anyway, let me tell you how people are now eating. Our book has been out 10 months. And by the way, the paperback is about to come out in the end of April. I don't know when this will air, but you can pre-order it and save yourself some money with a paperback, of course. So I thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, thank you.
Since then, just a few months ago, two incredibly important reports came out from the NHANES survey. Now, the NHANES stands for National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, which is conducted by the U.S. government. It is 50 years old, started in 1971. And scientists can access this sampling of data of nutrient intake and do studies and ask important questions. And they've been publishing on that for 50 years. Two studies came out within a week of each other at the end of 2021 that told us something about how Americans, and I live in Canada, but believe me, it's the same here. I just don't have as recent data from Canada. And told us how people are eating right now. And I'm going to give you two numbers, and it is very depressing.
Yeah.
First of all,
go ahead. Like, I'm ready.
What are we doing to our children? Children aged 2 to 19, 2/3 of what they are putting in their mouths is ultra-processed products. That means they are devoid of the vitamins and minerals that are needed in our brains. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a minute, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Are adults better? Well, not much. It's 57% for adults over the age of 19. 57% of what adults are putting in their mouths is ultra-processed stuff. So over half the time, or half of what we're consuming, doesn't have the vitamins and minerals that we need for our brain. Well, what does that mean? I want to just give you one example. So everybody's heard of serotonin. It's the happy chemical. It's a neurotransmitter. It enables our brains to work and our cells to communicate. And we want to have lots of serotonin. Well, you can do it a little bit with drugs like SSRIs, but it doesn't produce more. It just, enables more of the serotonin to remain active. But our brains know how to produce serotonin. I can't produce it. Plants can't produce it. I can't eat it. I don't know how to produce serotonin. Plants don't produce it, so I can't go and eat it in my food. And so if I want to have a lot of serotonin in my brain, I have to give my brain the building blocks. And then my clever little brain, which is only 2% of my body weight, but is the greediest organ in my body and yours, my clever little brain will take those building blocks and will manufacture serotonin. And I have a 4.5-minute video on my website, bonniejkaplan.com, if anyone wants to watch that. There are a lot of videos on there, but it really illustrates the way the micronutrients function as cofactors. A lot of your audience will know the word enzyme. They probably know that we have enzymatic reactions going on all the time in our physiology, but they probably don't know the word cofactors. The cofactors are the minerals and include the minerals and vitamins, which enable those enzymes to do their work. And if you're not feeding the enzymes what they need, your brain is not going to be working optimally. I sometimes say instead of the DSM, what we need is a single diagnosis, sluggish pathways. Because it's not this, what I've just said is not just relevant to serotonin, it's relevant to all the neurotransmitters, all the chemicals that you want produced, all the ATP that you want your mitochondria to produce, et cetera. They are all dependent on enzymatic reactions, which are dependent on the cofactors. So that is why we have to eat better. Sorry for that long answer, but I covered.
Oh, that's fabulous. Dependent on the cofactors. And the cofactors are, in many instances, vitamins and minerals.
I think they always include vitamins and minerals. There are sometimes other factors involved.
Exactly, combined. But taking it back to why we need those micronutrients, that's the crux of it. And it comes from whole foods, number one. And when we're displacing what you were saying about the ultra-processed food, maybe it's not entirely evil, but what it does do is displace the healthier calories that, are more nutrient dense. Some people don't necessarily like to think in nutrient density or in micronutrients. I do as a dietitian. It's true to who I am. Phytonutrients, you speak my language. So in any case, there's just so much evidence out there showing this. Correct. And I would love to even hear some more examples, if you don't mind, Bonnie, telling us about the science, the evidence that's out there, if any jumps out is that you'd like to share.
Sure. Since we're still dealing with pandemic times, although we're hoping it's over, why don't I talk about, and because stress management is one of your 4 pillars, why don't I talk a little bit about the literature showing that improved micronutrient consumption can help us cope better with stress. A lot of people think that we're living in an unusually stressful era. That is not the case. All you need to do is talk to your parents and grandparents about what they lived through with World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl in between, and then afterwards, the incredible problems that were going on in the world. There was a whole different kind of stress. Let's put it that way. It would be, I'd be hard pressed to say that my life has been more stressful than my parents. And yet, when I was growing up, the prevalence of mental disorders was less than 1%. And now it's, according to the World Health Organization, it's 20%. And we know that some of that is because people are more likely to come forward looking for help. And that's a good thing. But I don't think anyone thinks that 20% of our population should be mentally ill. And by the way, that's only a point prevalence, a point in time. If you look at lifetime prevalence, the World Health Organization says it's 50%. Wow. Should half of us have a diagnosed mental disorder in our lifetime? That's crazy. That means not that we are under more stress, but that we are less resilient. So how do we improve our resilience to stress? And there are many things like sleep, exercise, stress management tools.
What do you know? My 4 pillars.
They're all good. They're all good. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, the media does not like to cover anything about micronutrients. And I think it's because it's in pill form, most of the research. But the reality is that there are about 10 or 12 fully blinded, randomized clinical trials using B complex alone in normal populations. That means not from a mental health clinic, okay, just like population samples, like college students or whatever, showing in blinded trials that 1 B complex once a day, just over the counter, whenever you buy, it's cheap, it's easy. Always take it on a full stomach. So after breakfast every morning, taking a B complex improves resilience, okay? In addition, we have people like my co-author and I who have been studying broad spectrum micronutrients, and that means roughly all 15 vitamins and 15 minerals that we know are very important for brain health. And we've shown incredible resilience following huge disasters. So Julia, my co-author, is at University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, and she has published several studies after their earthquakes in 2010 and 2011, including population-based studies, including, are they placebo controlled? No. After you have a huge crisis like an earthquake, I guess none of our studies used a placebo. You can't, it's like unethical to say, if you come be in our study, we know you're in crisis, but you might get a placebo. So we use comparators. So she had like treatment as usual compared to micronutrient treatment. Then we had a flood study that we did here in southern Alberta because we had a major flood a couple years later. And again, we had an active comparator. And anyway, I'm going to sum up the results after I tell you the one last thing. And that is then back in New Zealand, they had the massacres in the 2 mosques in Christchurch. And again, you could not use a placebo, but she did clinical monitoring of people who chose to take micronutrients. And we've charted these and we published them all together. And the similarity in the results are astonishing because in all cases, within 4 to 6 weeks, and we were monitoring depression, anxiety, and stress, 4 to 6 weeks, the people who got active micronutrients, broad spectrum of them, were in the normal range. And the people who got treatment as usual or active comparator, we used an active comparator of a small 1 vitamin, they just weren't. They were still at elevated levels of depression, anxiety, and stress. So we need to keep that in mind when we look at crises everywhere that, and why, I guess I should comment here, Susan, why broad spectrum? My other colleagues here in Calgary and I have reviewed the literature and published on the ridiculousness of our society thinking that a single nutrient is going to improve brain health. It's just crazy. It comes out of the magic bullet thinking where if you have an infection, you take one thing, an antibiotic. Right. It also comes out of the scurvy era, right? When they figured out that things like scurvy and beriberi, all you had to do was take a single nutrient and you solve that health problem. Those are frank deficiency diseases. Mm-hmm. But for optimizing mental health, you need a broad spectrum of micronutrients to have significant benefit.
Right. It's not a disease of deficiency of one single nutrient. And that's the key there. It is fascinating to think about how it seems such a simple thing, our nutrition, our base nutrition, and getting adequate food, adequate micronutrients has such a profound effect on our overall functioning and health and well-being. It's why we're doing this, and to make people aware, to educate the public, and really take steps to improving this situation, because COVID did a job on people. Even though we're talking about nutrition, it's because, nutrition and mental health and brain function, because people are struggling. They're still very much struggling. And I see, in my own work that I do, these statistics are real on the level of anxiety and depression as a result. And then people don't eat as well. They don't sleep as well. They don't exercise as much. So we can help them out, Bonnie. That's exactly the goal. I do, as we're talking, it makes me think about the role of our gut health in relation to absorbing these micronutrients as well. And I do want to talk about that because I think it's kind of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. You eat a lot of highly refined foods that are void of fiber as well and micronutrients, and that alters the gut. But stress and trauma alters the gut microbiota as well. And so I just want to get your take on really how our gut health is involved in our brain health.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say a little bit about that because there are lots of books out there that go into huge amount of detail, and they're very accessible to people. But it's important that you understand, I think that your listeners understand a couple things. One is that if you're improving your diet to improve your brain health, you are coming closer to what the good gut bugs need. You are feeding your healthy gut bugs. And so that's all, you're solving a lot of problems altogether. In addition, people talk about when our microbiome is off, dysfunctional, imbalanced, whatever word you want to use, how there is more inflammation. And people who study inflammation sometimes end their articles by saying, well, we need more anti-inflammatory drugs. But, every single cell in our body and brain has at least one mitochondrion. That's a little energy factory. Most cells have lots of mitochondria. That's the plural of mitochondrion. And these energy factories are manufacturing ATP, our energy molecule. And if we give the mitochondria sufficient micronutrients, they'll do a better job of producing more ATP. Now, how is that relevant? Because our bodies have ways of coping with problems. And one of the things that our bodies have the ability to do is to keep inflammation within a good balance. Not all inflammation is bad. Inflammation is the way we fight off infection, for example. But it's excessive inflammation that has gotten out of balance for some people. And if they are eating properly, they will be producing the ATP that helps them manage that. It all comes back to diet. What we are putting in our mouths, it's the foundation. It's not the be all and end all, and it's certainly not magic, but it's the foundation. It's the base, what we have to begin with. Yes, meditate and do yoga, but first feed your brain.
Feed our bodies, which feeds our brains. And we talk and recommend whole foods all the time. I agree. Every one of these articles, every dietitian, we're out there saying, eat more fruits and veggies, get your, local fresh and all that. And I say the same. What if it really is difficult for people to do that on a daily basis?
I'm going to ask your opinion about something, Susan, because you're a dietitian. So I know that in one of the Australian studies of whole of diet, they showed that eating a healthier diet saved 20% of the food budget. Yeah. And people are surprised at that. And I know some clinicians here in Calgary who have, working with clients, have asked them to keep track of what they're spending on their food. And then as they move to a better whole foods diet, continue to keep track. And they also report people are saving money. Yet there is this story out there that eating real food costs more. And I always say, if you don't eat steak and lobster every week, it doesn't have to cost more, especially if you learn to cook, especially with beans and dried legumes, etc. But I want to know from you, why do people, what's your opinion? Why do people think that a whole foods diet is more expensive?
I think they're detached from the reality. When you go grocery shop, you tend to spend a lot at once versus here you spend $12 and another $5 and here's, and those daily smaller amounts don't seem to add up to that one big shopping where, oh gosh, I just spent $8 on berries or right. So I think that's part of it. I do think there's a disconnect. And to be honest, there are a lot of people who aren't even doing the food shopping. In every household, it's not every person doing the food shopping. And so I think they're hearing this and they're making assumptions. That's also part of it. So it's really interesting and complicated. But those who do have the money, who have the budgets and think, I see this as well, even if the money isn't a factor for them, they're still, quote unquote, making the wrong decision, the wrong choices, because there's so much convenient food out there in the sense of takeouts. Every restaurant now, we're keeping them for our economy. Maybe that's been a good thing to keep a lot of restaurants and takeout food going during the pandemic. But you know what I'm saying? Like, time seems to be a limiting factor for people. And also I'll tie it back to the nutrition and cooking education. We'll say not just knowing fruits and vegetables are good for you, but really, how do I make a quick and easy meal? And this is, I think, we're lacking our children, lacking in general. Children in the schools now, my kids laugh at me when I get on my little soapbox about kids not having home ec in the schools and learning how to cook. And I think that even starting there is something that is really doable. So I just went on for a while, but it's complicated in that sense. Where do we start? It's overwhelming.
So I think you made a few good points, but I was especially curious about the very first one you made, because that's what lately I've been saying to people, you have to keep track of what you're spending, because people go to there are people who eat out of vending machines and they go to 7-Elevens and stuff. And so they think, oh, I only have $2 to spend. And they don't realize how many times they're spending those. So it's each individual item is cheap.
Yes.
If you don't count the long-term costs of healthcare. Anyway, that's a different story, isn't it?
That's a whole different story. It's really true, though. Those $2 here and $2 there add up. And
and also people need to learn how to cook from not just, I mean, it's so quick to cook with lentils, right? And I went online a while ago and I put in, I Googled recipes for lentils. And I got 7 million recipes in less than 1 second. That's more than I could try in my lifetime. So there's infinite variety for cooking with lentils, and they're so quick. But also, it's not that terrible to buy your beans and peas canned or frozen. They're still much healthier than a lot of the alternatives. And if you do that, especially, we explain this in our book, and we have a chapter on recipes. If you rinse off the beans that when you open the cans, you'll get rid of the extra sodium. And then you have a very fast meal. And again, millions of, don't buy our book for the recipes, even though we think we have some good ones in there.
You do. I checked them out.
But really you can just go online and get whatever you want. But you have to be motivated to do it.
You can. That's the difference. You have to be willing and motivated. And then, as I always say, you can make the best plan in the world. If you don't actually go and purchase the food and have it on hand, it's not happening. So if you don't have the pantry stocked with the beans or the dried and the canned, and that's a big part of it. And so this is why we're talking about it, because the more we talk about it and give people ideas and make it easy for them to purchase all of these foods that they need to have on hand to whip up a quick and easy, healthy, high fiber, whole foods meal, it's less intimidating. And that's my goal as well, to make it easy, not intimidating, and even fun and delicious. So it's all tied into one, because we love to eat. And I did want to ask you, I have a couple more questions about that, but people love to talk food. So I want to find out, what do you do on a daily basis? What are your daily healthy go-tos for a better brain?
Well, that's interesting. A couple of decades ago, I looked at my diet and thought, I am just not eating enough vegetables. I don't know if you can tell, I'm like 5 feet tall. I'm very small. And at dinner, so at dinner, I can't get enough food in me in terms of vegetables, and eating vegetables for breakfast or lunch wasn't working for me very well. And so I developed the habit of cutting up a big bowl or pot of raw veggies and taking a container of them to work. And so, because I never heat anything in plastic, of course, but they're cold, you can just take a plastic container of veggies with a bit of olive oil drizzled on it and a little bit of salt. And I've been doing that for decades. And so in the book, I think it's called Bonnie's Favorite Morning Snack or something.
It is. I was just
So
I was surprised to see veggies as your morning snack.
I've gotten so that I crave them. They're delicious.
I'm sorry, I completely.
Go ahead.
Because I get excited about this, Bonnie. When you tell people put a drizzle of a good olive oil and a sprinkle of salt,
right,
that's a key part of it. And then it does taste good and you absorb the nutrients.
You absorb the nutrients. When I used to take it to work, I used to try putting a little bit of vinegar on it too, but it inevitably dripped out and spilled in my lunch bag or whatever. So then I went to just a bit of olive oil and a bit of salt. And I've been doing that literally for decades, and I hardly ever miss it. And I find around 11:30, I start craving it. It's delicious. It's crunchy. It's fiber. And if you eat a cup and a half, 2 cups of that, you're getting a lot of nutrients for the day. I still eat vegetables at dinner.
Oh, good.
You're knowing that right. The current Canada Food Guide, I don't know if you know this, it's different from the US, but one thing I like about it, it's been a little controversial for different reasons, but it says, picture your plate 50% vegetables. And I think that's a step in the right direction, instead of talking about half cups or portions or whatever. Yeah.
No, it definitely is, because I am connected to a lot of individuals. I see the diets of people on a daily basis, and I can tell you across the board, at least American diets are still lacking in both fruits and vegetables. They don't eat unhealthfully necessarily. It's just simply lacking. And I say that, a lack of the good stuff. And so how do you make it a habit? That's what it's all about. I love your habit, and it's lasted for how many years now?
Decades.
Bonnie's
I also, for at least 20 years, would cut up fruit before I'd have my breakfast. So I got my fruit that way. And I began to feel like it just didn't suit me quite as well. But I've stuck with the veggies, and I get fruit throughout the day.
Yeah, and what works for you? We all have individual taste preferences, so that's a big part of it. I do want to circle back to the studies and the pills, though, just to differentiate for people and listeners, because a lot of the studies were done using, we'll call it food in a pill, the micronutrients in pill form versus whole foods. So can you just give us a little insight into, whole foods for, like, people ask me this question all the time. Do you recommend a daily multivitamin? Or you were talking about the broad spectrum. So I just want to circle back to that.
Yeah, I get that question all the time too. I will never say don't take a daily multivitamin with minerals. And over the years, the daily multivites have added more and more minerals to them, because I don't think they're bad for you, but don't ever expect them to have a therapeutic impact on a mental health challenge that you're having, because the doses are so trivial. They're like way below RDA. Usually, typically, if I were to make a general statement, around 25% of RDA. Whereas the ones that have been shown to have a therapeutic impact on mental health are above RDA but below tolerable upper level, which is a very wide gap, as you know. I mean, there's a wide range. So that's probably the main reason that the multi-nutrient formulas that have been studied and have shown in about 50-some trials to show benefit for mental health problems have all been in that higher range. And I've never even heard an anecdote of anybody saying, oh, I started taking an over-the-counter multivitamin and I felt my brain was working better. Never heard that at all. It is really important that people know that I'm a food first person. You're a food first person. Our book is Food First. Let's improve our diets, because we've got a huge way to go to improve our diets. But there are reasons to study nutrients in pill form. One reason is that we have inherited predispositions to need different amounts of cofactors in our brains. And we know that from research in the physical health world. We don't have much research in mental health, but it's the same system of metabolism. So for example, just to make it very concrete for your listeners, you might need more magnesium than I do for optimal brain metabolism. I might need more vitamin 6 than you do, and somebody else might need, a very small amount of those and might need a lot of iron or zinc. We have no test yet that can look at what our brain needs for optimal function. We have tests of peripheral blood, what's in there, and from that we can infer that probably that's getting up to the brain. But we have no way of saying, oh, compared to what you need for optimal brain function, your blood tests are not so great, okay? So without a test to tell us what is needed optimally, we need to eat a whole variety of foods. And it's not surprising that some people, even when they're on an ideal diet, the way you and I would define it, a healthy diet, some people take one of these broad spectrum micronutrient formulas that have been studied, and they still feel better. And so that is probably evidence of something that the Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling predicted back in the 1960s, which is that what is inherited with a predisposition to a mental disorder is something involving metabolism of essential nutrients in the brain. So anyway, so that's the reason for some people, it's important to look at multi-nutrients in pill form. And there's another reason that you'll really like, which is sometimes people don't believe that nutrition is relevant to their brain function. And when they take one of these broad spectrum formulas and they feel it, it's like, oh my goodness, I think I have to change my diet. I have to learn to cook. We have encountered that in people often. So sometimes you need to hit them fast and hard with a change for them to see the importance of improving their lifestyle.
That is true. And that's where you and I both do see it, that very quick impact. And there's something just so incredibly rewarding about that, isn't it? People, how you feel and function, and in a short period of time is fabulous. So that's also why we do what we do. I love that. Okay, so I did mention that your primary goal is to influence the way mental health treatment is delivered. So back to the delivery of, reaching more people. So there are plenty of people out there who just really aren't getting treatment. Do you have any recommendations? Like, how are you thinking that we can take steps to improve that? What are you focusing on for improving the delivery of information and improving diets?
Right.
I want to help with that.
Yeah, well, with a 50% lifetime prevalence of mental disorders, we will never have enough psychiatrists or psychologists to help with treatment. And obviously, the worsening of mental health problems in terms of prevalence has coincided with the psychopharmacology explosion, a revolution, some people call it. So clearly, that's not solving the problem. We need to be open-minded to look elsewhere. But there is a logical way we should be approaching mental health based on the current literature and based on the fact that there's no magic anywhere. I don't want any of your listeners to go away thinking that I have some magical new way to treat something. But chapter 12, the last chapter in our book, is our vision of the future, a better tomorrow. And first of all, especially with children. I was in a pediatrics department, okay? So especially with children, those little developing brains, don't medicate them first. That should be the last choice. First, let's improve their diet. Let's look at, maybe parents need and would benefit from some kinds of family training, parenting programs. The children might benefit from yoga, relaxation, whatever. And if you're talking about adults, all of this is true too. Looking at first the diet and then all the things involving their social network and so forth. Then, if necessary, add micronutrients in pill form. If there is still benefit to be had, try micronutrients in pill form. And the formulas that have been studied the most are available throughout North America online. And chapter 11 in our book evaluates all of the multi-nutrient formulas that have been investigated by scientists like myself who have no financial tie to any company. That's very important to us because
it's very important.
Yeah, well, look at what's happened to the mental health literature with medications. It's completely corrupted by the way the companies have funded the research. So it's really important. Only after all of that, if you have someone who is just not benefiting enough, then medication is there. Medication will always be there. Mm-hmm. And we do not I don't think anyone benefits from taking an anti-medication perspective, although a lot of the medication prescribing people with medications take an anti-nutrition perspective, which blows my mind. But we have here in Alberta, I know that there have been psychiatrists who've told their patients, if you take nutrients, don't come back and see me.
Wow.
Isn't that awful? It
is awful. I have no words for that.
Anyway, so that is my vision for how mental health treatment should be and how it should be operationalized in, say, a mental health clinic. At first referral, people should be evaluated for their diet. They should be educated about what nutrients do in the brain. They should be encouraged to track how they're doing in terms of their eating and also their expenditures. And then they should be referred for counseling to deal with everything and all the other issues in their lives, etc. But I almost see nutrition education as a valuable pre-treatment in a mental health clinic. I haven't gotten into one yet, but I am influencing some of them here in Alberta right now. So,
well, that's the start. I completely agree. You got to teach a man to fish. Right. So,
but do you know the reaction I get from clinicians, Susan, is they say, oh, we can't afford a dietitian in our clinic. And then I'm in this peculiar position of saying, you don't need a dietitian. I respect it. As I've told you, I respect
exactly
a lot, but it doesn't take a dietitian's training to get that first step going of saying, Do you understand the difference between whole foods and ultra-processed chemicals?
You're absolutely right. Exactly. That education can be done by a number of people. It does not have to be, I agree, a registered dietitian. As much as I love my profession and that's what we do, it's sharing that information and educating other educators as well is a big part of it. So this is such an important area, Bonnie, for our mental health. There is a mental health crisis. There's an obesity epidemic. I mean, we could go on forever and talk about the negatives, unfortunately. And I think, closing things out today, I would really just encourage listeners to pick up your brain if they are struggling or know somebody in their family who is struggling with mental illness of any kind, be it anxiety, depression, ADHD. It's really a helpful book, number one. That's why we're talking about it. And in general, though, taking a look at your own personal diet and food first, as you and I are both saying, food first. It's just so powerful what foods can do to turn around your health quickly in that sense. So, and I know you agree with that, but there are so many facets to this that we can continue talking about. And I love empowering and inspiring people. And I personally am going to go to your website and check out that 4-minute video. I think that that's going to be very educational. So we want for listeners as well. But before we close out, and I want you to give listeners some final information about yourself and where to find you, one thing I ask all of my guests, Bonnie, is what is one thing you're grateful for today?
Oh, the list is so long, Susan.
That's good.
I'm grateful for my good health and my husband's good health. We're both in our 70s. And I'm grateful for the peace that we have in Canada, which is not in many places in the world. I'll stop there.
Yeah, those are huge things to be grateful for, though. For health and peace. I'm right with you. I love that. Thank you. Okay, and then finally, as I just said, back to your website, where can you want to repeat that, please? Where
It turns out there are too many Bonnie Kaplans in the world, so I had to use my middle initial for my website. So and Kaplan's with a K, so it's bonniejkaplan.com. And when you go to that website, the first thing you'll see is the purple cauliflower, which is the cover of our book, The Better Brain. So that will take you to the book websites if you're interested. But then take a look at the different tabs. In addition to the videos, we have a tab called Tips for Clinicians. And, I've been thinking lately I should change the name of that because they're really tips for people in general if they're trying to improve their diet. So you might want to take a look at that. And we have recipes on there that are not in the book that we just keep adding. So there's a lot there.
Oh, that's fabulous. I know we don't need millions of lentil recipes, but when you find a couple good ones, that's really helpful, or something new and different in coming for you. So thank you. That's wonderful. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I'm grateful for your book, and I'd say come back if we can and continue this discussion. And thank you for the work you do. I've really loved talking with you.
Same here. Thanks very much, Susan.
Thank you for taking the time to join me and listen to this episode. Listeners can find more information and also subscribe to the Sense of Wellness podcast at www.ccphp.net/SENS/podcast. That's www.ccphp.net/sens/podcast. This show is brought to you by Castle Connolly Private Health Partners. We are a concierge medicine organization that partners with exceptional physicians to deliver an unrivaled healthcare experience while also empowering our members to achieve their optimal well-being. Be sure to listen in next time to the Sense of Wellness podcast, and remember, simple daily habits matter most.